Welcome to the Chasing Stillness podcast. My name is Travis, and this podcast is for those who are chasing stillness and that want to end the chase. For today's episode, I invite you to wonder about facing the unsatisfactoriness of your life. Facing life's unsatisfactoriness. Life is suffering, or so the common English translation of the Buddha's words tell us. The recorded word he said was dukkha. Understanding dukkha is one of the most important teachings in Buddhism and Zen. Often, other words translated into English from dukkha are stress, anxiety, unsatisfactoriness, and the one that seems to fit the most and makes the most sense is life does not satisfy. To say that life is suffering seems so pessimistic, but that's the nature of suffering. It's neither pessimistic or optimistic. It's the reality of every single human that has ever come into being. It has no preferences, and it certainly doesn't care who it affects. So there are a lot of different areas of suffering or dukkhas that affect our lives. For instance, one is a physical and mental sort of suffering. Think of physical things that happen to our bodies, whether we want them to or not. Things like getting older, being hungry, that knee pain when you walk, or even something more severe or chronic. And the other side of that, the mental aspect of suffering affects us when we get mad, frustrated, or even things like worrying about paying rent next month or the mortgage. Another type of suffering comes from life itself that we just can't control. It's the never-ending cycle of change that life throws us into. Like this, we win the lottery today, we lose it tomorrow. We have a great day at work, and then when we arrive home, we find our favorite food spoiled that we've been planning all week to cook. They say in some states, if you don't like the weather, wait 5 minutes. It'll change. And I'd say if you're happy or unhappy, wait 5 minutes because it just might change. The last type of suffering is the all-encompassing one. It's the more difficult one to recognize, but once we do, it gives us the most relief. It's probably what deep down led many of us to seek and search for the answers to why we're here. Why do we exist? It is the question of existence, anxiety, and not wanting to be seen naked. That seems to make it very real. It's a tricky one because it's often hidden in the shadows, but it's always there even though we don't see it. So why do we turn away from life's unsatisfactoriness? Well, I think so many of us turn away from the suffering experienced in our lives. It's almost like our natural tendency when faced with really anything unpleasant. It's like we have this hope that if we turn away from it, it'll just kind of go away. Yet we know somehow that it won't go away. We'd rather not be bogged down with the bad. I mean, after all, life is short, right? When I get lost in the day and I find myself not being present, I could always find something else to turn to if faced with anything that I didn't like. But here's the thing. Being present takes the power away from the things that we make up in our minds. I have a friend who's a Zen monk, and once he said to me that he is at peace with his unpeacefulness. And when I heard him, it was an immediate reminder to face the unsatisfactoriness of my very own life. He wasn't denying, bypassing, or anything other than directly looking at his unpeacefulness, and he was doing it fearlessly. That is an example of living out the teaching of the Buddha's first noble truth. I've experienced much of the life does not satisfy aspect of this truth. Here's an example. I seem to always be pulled in two directions by my mind. And of course, that caused so much tension. If I sat on a park bench and watched ducks waddle around a pond's edge, I'd be consumed about being at dinner later that night. So here I was. I would disrupt the peaceful moments with thoughts about the future. And then when I got to the dinner, the restaurant would be busy, loud, and then I just couldn't even help myself. I'd go back inside my head, return to the water's edge, wishing I was sitting with the ducks, and thus completely missing the stillness that was there in that chaos. That may seem contradictory to some, but be assured that stillness pervades everything. It's everywhere, and it's always with everyone. It's just that we don't recognize that it's there. So, how to create more suffering? I think it's important to have an understanding about how we create more of our suffering, because the unsatisfactoriness of our life grows when we turn away from it. That creates more unease and more unhappiness. Then, on top of that, we punish ourselves for turning away in the first place. Then we punish ourselves even more for turning away in the first place and fight with ourselves because we might feel guilt or shame because we did something that we knew wouldn't work. We ask ourselves things like, why did I do that? I know better than that. I have to do better. It seems like that familiar cycle that so many of the mystics warn us about. Think about Buddha's parable about two arrows. It goes a little something like this. A man is struck by a poisoned arrow and a doctor wants to take it out immediately. But the man doesn't want to remove the arrow until he knows who shot it, what the person looked like, who the person's parents were, and why he shot it. But then what would happen? If we were just to wait until all these questions were answered, that man's going to die. So just remove the arrows. I mean, even Christ warned us when he said, and which of you, by being anxious, can add a single hour to his span of life? We worry about so many unnecessary things. So then, really, I guess the question is, how do we face it so it loses its power? So, how to face life's unsatisfactoriness is really to question yourself about what you're ultimately craving in that moment. This means we have to go below what we think it is that we're craving. You know, you can even think of it like concentric circles or concentric rings. On the outside ring, we have a craving that is very surface level. And often that's where most people stop. It's the easiest one to latch onto because it's far away from us. You know, it's like it's not so attached to us and we're not so attached to it. But as we dig deeper into what we're craving, it's revealed that what we thought the initial craving was becomes deeper and closer to us. So, to illustrate this, let me use a situation that I'm sure we've all experienced: avoiding someone. Let's say you're in a grocery store rushing down the aisles to pick up a few things to cook for dinner. Then you head over to the produce section and you're rummaging through the vegetables and you hear it. A voice says, "Hey there, I haven't seen you in a while." And you immediately cringe because you already know who it is. You would know that voice anywhere. Before you even look in their direction, you're creating scenarios in your mind to escape that situation. In a flash, that to-do list from 3 weeks ago is now a top priority. You're consumed with your racing thoughts. I hope they don't ask me about so-and-so. I gotta get out of here. I can't stand him. How can I not be mean but still get away from him? Ugh. It goes on while we sit there and politely pretend that we're interested in what they're saying. Meanwhile, your stomach is in knots, your face is flush, and you'd rather the tomatoes start exploding so you could get away. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, they push their cart past you and around the corner. Oh, you survived. You made it. They get down the next aisle. You're thinking about how annoying they are. And didn't they even know that you were in a rush to get home? I mean, come on. And there you have it. That's creating much more suffering by wanting to be somewhere else. Here's the thing that really helped me tremendously when I first started this practice. Number one is be present. Whether you want to or not, just be present. And two, after you're being present, inquire about what you're craving in opposition to what's actually happening. So, what is it that you're making up in your head that's so different from the reality of what's happening? And you know, this does take practice. When I first started this, it was after an encounter like this one in the grocery store that I'd ask myself, okay, what was I craving? What was I so attached to that I made myself uncomfortable? And much of the time, as I continued to dig for the answer had nothing to do with them. It was all me. I'll leave you with this. How different would life be if we cut through this mental cycle instead of our hearts? This would allow us to quit craving something different than what we've got at this moment. Okay, so if you're hearing this message, you've listened to the entire episode, and for that, I thank you.